Did you know a 15-year-old girl refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus 9 months before Rosa Parks, and nearly no one talks about her? Her name is Claudette Colvin. And while history nearly erased her, her bravery helped ignite the movement that changed America. Stay with us as we uncover the story of a teenager who challenged the system, paid the price, and laid the foundation for civil rights victories to come. You're about to dive into an incredible life full of courage, struggle, and impact, far beyond one bus ride. This channel is your place to discover in-depth biographies of powerful Black figures in education, science, sports, and more. We go beyond the headlines, into their personal lives, their homes, their battles, and their success. This is the untold story of Claudette Colvin. Before the movement had a face, it had a voice, and it sounded like hers. Let's begin. Claudette Colvin was born on September 5, 1939, in Montgomery, Alabama. She grew up in a deeply segregated world, where Black children were reminded daily of the lines they couldn't cross. Raised by her great-aunt and great-uncle in one of Montgomery's poorest Black neighborhoods, Claudette learned early that injustice wasn't just a concept, it was her daily reality. Money was tight, but her family instilled in her the values of strength, faith, and education. She was a curious, intelligent child who loved reading and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. At Booker T. Washington High School, she stood out for her sharp mind. Her teachers described her as thoughtful, determined, and outspoken, especially when it came to justice. Even as a teenager, Claudette asked the hard questions. Why couldn't she try on shoes in a department store? Why did she have to move to the back of the bus? Those questions didn't just stay in her head. They stirred something powerful, and soon the world would feel it. March 2, 1955. It was a typical school day in Montgomery, Alabama. Claudette Colvin, just 15 years old, boarded a crowded city bus after class. She paid her fare and sat in the colored section, just behind the seats reserved for white passengers. As the bus filled, a white woman boarded, and the driver ordered Claudette and 3 other Black passengers to give up their row. The others moved. Claudette stayed seated. She said later, "I couldn't move." History had me glued to the seat. It felt like Sojourner Truth was pushing down on one shoulder and Harriet Tubman on the other. The bus driver shouted. Claudette stayed silent. 2 police officers arrived. They yanked her out of her seat, handcuffed her, and dragged her off the bus. At just 15 years old, she was arrested, thrown in jail, and charged with disturbing the peace, violating segregation laws, and even assaulting an officer. This wasn't staged. This wasn't planned. It was a spontaneous act of courage from a teenager who had studied Black history in school that very week. While Claudette sat in a cell, her classmates went home. Her life would never be the same again. She had done what no one else dared to do, but few were ready to support her. Claudette Colvin should have become a symbol of resistance, but instead she became a footnote. Why? Because the civil rights leaders in Montgomery weren't just fighting injustice, they were fighting for public support, and they knew image mattered. Claudette was young, she was dark-skinned, she was working class, and not long after her arrest she became pregnant by an older man. To some in the movement, she didn't fit the image they believed America would rally behind. They feared the backlash, the judgment, the distraction. So when Rosa Parks was arrested 9 months later, the community rallied around her instead. Rosa was older, lighter-skinned, married, employed, and deeply respected. She was seen as the perfect face for the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Claudette, meanwhile, was pushed aside. Left out of the story she helped spark. She once said, "I felt like I was getting a big shove out the door. They didn't want to use a poor Black girl who got pregnant." And so the history books erased her. But the truth never changed. She was first. She was fearless, and without her, none of it may have happened. Though the spotlight moved on, Claudette Colvin's courage didn't end with that one bus ride. In 1956, her name reappeared, this time as a key plaintiff in a case that would change history, Browder v. Gale. This federal lawsuit challenged the constitutionality of Alabama's segregated bus system. Claudette, along with Aurelia Browder, Susie McDonald, and Mary Louise Smith, bravely testified. She told the court what had happened to her. A 15-year-old girl arrested, humiliated, and nearly forgotten, all for staying seated. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in November 1956, the court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. It wasn't a protest alone that ended segregation on buses, it was that lawsuit. And Claudette Colvin was at the heart of it. She may not have led a boycott, but she helped win the legal battle that forced Montgomery, and eventually the nation, to change. Without Claudette Colvin, there might never have been a legal victory. She wasn't just part of the movement. She was part of the mechanism that made it work. After the court ruling, Claudette Colvin didn't become a national figure. There were no headlines, no awards, no public thanks. Instead, she was labeled a troublemaker. Struggling to find work in Montgomery, she eventually moved to New York City. There, she built a quiet life far from the chaos she'd helped ignite. She worked as a nurse's aide in a Manhattan nursing home for over 3 decades. She raised 2 sons, one biological, one adopted. She lived in the Bronx and kept her story mostly to herself. For years, she stayed out of the public eye. Not because she regretted what she did, but because the world wasn't ready to honor her place in it. She carried the memory of that bus ride, that courtroom, and that jail cell while tending to elderly patients, raising her family, and navigating life as a black woman in a country still catching up to the promises it made. She once said, "I knew then, and I know now that when it comes to justice, there is no easy way to get it. You have to take a stand and say, this is not right." Even in silence, she never stopped standing. For decades, Claudette Colvin's name rarely appeared in textbooks or documentaries. While others became symbols of change, she remained in the shadows. But history has a way of catching up. In 2005, her story began to resurface through books, interviews, and renewed public interest. People started asking, why didn't we learn about her? In 2019, the state of Alabama honored her with a resolution recognizing her role in the Civil Rights Movement. She was 79 years old. Then, in 2021, 66 years after her arrest, Claudette Colvin's juvenile record was finally expunged. The charges were erased. The injustice officially acknowledged. She stood before a judge once again. But this time, she wasn't a defendant. She was a hero finally being heard. She never asked for fame. But after a lifetime of silence, her voice was finally amplified. She said, "I am not a footnote. I am part of the story." And now, the world is beginning to say her name. Claudette Colvin didn't just make history, she changed its course. Her legacy is proof that courage doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't always come from the spotlight. Sometimes it comes from a teenage girl who says, "No, I will not move." She inspired a movement, contributed to a landmark Supreme Court case, and stood firm when the world turned away. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. Though she never sought fame or fortune, Claudette Colvin's life stands as a blueprint for resistance. She never built an empire. She didn't live in a mansion. But what she built was bigger than wealth. She built a legacy. Today, her name is taught in classrooms, honored in civil rights exhibits, and spoken alongside Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and others who changed the world. Her story reminds us that history isn't just shaped by leaders, it's shaped by the brave. Claudette once said, "I knew what I was doing." It wasn't about being tired. It was about being tired of the injustice. If her voice had been amplified back then, maybe change would have come sooner. But now, it's our turn to carry it forward. If this story moved you, like and share this video. Subscribe for more powerful untold stories of Black excellence, courage, and legacy. Because voices like Claudette Colvin's deserve to echo across generations.